The stars flickered in the distance, casting an eerie glow over the barren remnants of what was once a thriving planet. Earth, the cradle of humanity, lay in ruin, a decimated husk abandoned by its people. 3,000 years had passed since the Galactic Council's fleets descended upon Earth, wiping out the last vestiges of its civilizations. But while Earth's surface was nothing more than a graveyard of crumbled cities and lost history, humanity had never truly disappeared. It had simply been waiting, hidden in the far corners of the galaxy, biding its time. Now, the long-dormant embers of rebellion were about to ignite. The survivors, humanity's last hope, had returned, not as refugees, but as a force ready to take back their home. And they had learned much in the years since Earth's fall. Their enemies, the Council, had underestimated them. They had taken the planet for granted, believing that by erasing Earth, they could erase its people. They couldn't have been more wrong. Aboard a sleek, black vessel, the command ship of humanity's resistance, an air of tension filled the bridge. The crew, a mix of soldiers, engineers, and strategists, were hard at work, their faces a reflection of the purpose that drove them. They had all lost something: family, friends, entire generations of people who had once called Earth home. But now, after 3 millennia, the time had come to strike back. The leader of the resistance, standing at the front of the command center, gazed at the holographic map displayed before them. Their eyes were narrowed, every muscle in their body coiled with determination. "We're almost there," the leader said, their voice steady but filled with an unmistakable fire. "The Council's forces are scattered across the galaxy, but they'll never see us coming. We've spent centuries preparing for this moment." The crew nodded silently, understanding the magnitude of what they were about to do. The Galactic Council, the powerful alliance that controlled much of the known universe, had made a grave mistake by destroying Earth. They had believed humanity's spirit would be crushed, that the Earth's people would never rise again. But they were wrong. The survivors had spent millennia in the shadows, learning, evolving, and becoming something far more than the Council could ever anticipate. Behind the leader, one of the officers stepped forward, his voice low. "We've located their main fleet in the Helios system. They think Earth is lost forever, but they won't be prepared for us." The leader turned to face the officer, a fierce glint in their eyes. "We won't just strike at them. We will make them regret ever laying a hand on our home. This is more than just a battle. This is the end of their reign." The crew stood tall, every one of them knowing that this mission meant more than victory. It meant justice. The destruction of Earth had been brutal and swift. No mercy had been shown. But this time, the tables had turned. Humanity had learned from its past mistakes, and the resistance was prepared to fight with every ounce of its strength. As the ship hurtled toward the target, the leader reflected on the long years of struggle. They remembered the whispers of the old stories, the tales passed down by those who had lived through the fall. The day the sky darkened, with the arrival of the Council's fleets, the day cities crumbled and millions of lives were lost. Earth had fought back, but it wasn't enough. The Council's technology, their vast armadas, had been too powerful. Humanity's last stand had been nothing more than a tragic final chapter in the planet's history. But those who had survived had learned to adapt. They had gone underground, establishing colonies on distant planets. The galaxy had forgotten about them. The Council had believed Earth's destruction was the end of the story, but it had only been the beginning of humanity's evolution. The Resistance had spent centuries building new weapons, learning the weaknesses of the Council's fleet and forging alliances with other forgotten civilizations races who had been oppressed by the Council just like humanity. Over time, they had become a formidable force, one that could take down even the most powerful of the Council's warships. As the leader looked out over the vast expanse of space, they thought about the sacrifices that had been made to get to this point. Countless lives had been lost, and yet humanity had endured. They were not the same people who had once inhabited Earth. They had been forged in the fires of adversity, and now they were coming back to reclaim their birthright. The ship's artificial gravity adjusted as they entered the Helios system. The faint glow of distant stars lit up the vast expanse around them. The fleet of the Galactic Council came into view, a daunting sight of massive warships, each one an intimidating symbol of the Council's power. But the Resistance wasn't afraid. They had come to fight, not just for survival, but for retribution. "This is it," the leader muttered, their voice filled with a quiet, determined fury. "We take back Earth." The crew braced themselves, preparing for the battle that would determine the fate of their home world. They had trained for this moment for so long, and now there was no turning back. As the countdown to battle began, the tension in the room was palpable. But the leader knew this wasn't just about defeating the Council's fleet. No, this was about something far deeper. It was about showing the universe that humanity would never be forgotten. It was about sending a message to every civilization in the galaxy, a message that would echo through the stars for centuries to come. As the final preparations were made, the leader's mind drifted to Earth, to the cities they would reclaim, to the forests, to the oceans. They remembered the beauty of the planet, the way it had once teemed with life. They remembered the sound of laughter, the warmth of the sun on their skin. They had lost it all, but now they would take it back. With a final glance toward the vast enemy fleet, the leader took a deep breath and gave the order. Initiate the attack. For Earth. The first wave of resistance ships shot forward, their weapons blazing with destructive force. The battle had begun. The war to avenge Earth's destruction by the Galactic Council was finally underway. And somewhere, in the heart of space, the Council's leaders watched, unaware that the greatest threat they had ever known had just awakened. The battle raged across the Helios system, a chaotic symphony of flashing lights and explosive bursts of energy. The Resistance's ships weaved between the massive Council warships, their speed and agility outmatching the enemy's brute force. But even with their advantage in tactics, the Council's fleet was formidable. The enormous warships, heavily armored and bristling with weaponry, unleashed wave after wave of devastating fire, and the Resistance could feel the weight of every shot. Their shields flared bright as they absorbed the hits, but they weren't invincible. Each moment was a dance with death. In the heart of the conflict, the leader's ship, the Aegis, cut through the chaos, expertly evading fire and returning with pinpoint strikes against the Council's forces. The crew was united in their resolve, each of them fully aware of the stakes, but their nerves were beginning to fray as the battle dragged on. The leader's eyes remained fixed on the warships ahead, but inside, their thoughts were elsewhere on Earth, on the destruction of their home, on the family and friends they had lost. "Commander," the voice of their second-in-command broke through the tension. "There's something off about their tactics." The leader's eyes narrowed, turning to the screen where a pattern of movement among the Council's ships caught their attention. It wasn't just a random attack they were coordinating, too well for it to be coincidence. A sinking feeling spread in the leader's stomach. "What do you mean?" "It's like they've been expecting us," the second-in-command replied. "They're anticipating every move we make, even the unexpected ones. It's as if they know our strategy." The realization hit the leader like a punch to the gut. How could that be? The resistance had been careful, planning every detail of this attack in secret. There was no way the council could have anticipated this level of precision, this timing. A sudden jolt rattled the Aegis, pulling the leader from their thoughts. The ship's alarms blared as a massive wave of energy impacted the hull, sending sparks flying across the bridge. The crew scrambled to maintain control. One of the technicians shouted, "Hull integrity at 40%. "We can't take much more of this." The leader's hand gripped the command console, their heart racing. They had known this was a dangerous mission, but now the reality of the situation was crashing down on them. They were being outmatched in ways they hadn't expected. The Council had more ships than they anticipated, and their tactics were cutting through the Resistance's strategy like a blade through paper. "Retreat," the leader barked, trying to keep their voice steady despite the rising panic. "Fall back to the outer perimeter. We'll regroup and assess." The order was relayed to the fleet, but the Council's ships were quick to respond. The leader watched in horror as more and more of the Resistance's vessels were targeted, their once proud ships crumbling under the relentless fire. It was a nightmare unfolding before their eyes, one they had feared for years. "Commander," the voice of the communications officer came through, breathless with urgency. "They've activated their main weapon. It's aimed right at the heart of our fleet." The leader's stomach churned. The main weapon of the Council's flagship was known for its devastating power, able to obliterate entire fleets with a single shot. If they didn't act quickly, this battle would be over before it even began. The Resistance was supposed to be ready for this, but now they were fighting a war on two fronts: the Council's military might and the growing realization that their enemies might have known they were coming all along. The leader's mind raced. How could they have known? They had spent years preparing. Was there a traitor among their ranks? Had someone betrayed them? The thought lingered in their mind, heavy and cold. But there was no time to dwell on it. They had to act, and fast. "Prepare to intercept," the leader ordered. "We can't let them fire that weapon." The Aegis surged forward, pushing the limits of its engines. The leader's crew worked in a coordinated frenzy, firing off everything they had left at the Council ships. But the enemy was relentless. They had anticipated their every move. The leader's mind was filled with one thought. They needed to find out how the Council had known they were coming. The answer was out there, somewhere in the chaos, and it was the key to turning the tide. "Commander," the second-in-command shouted, pointing at the screens. "That's it. They're broadcasting something. It's not a weapon. It's a signal." The leader's brow furrowed in confusion. A signal? What kind of signal? "They're sending out a distress call," the second-in-command continued, voice heavy with disbelief. "A call to someone or something." The words hung in the air for a moment before the leader's mind clicked. They had suspected for years that the Council's power wasn't just based on its military forces. There were whispers of a mysterious faction within the Council, a faction that controlled the true heart of its power. A group that operated in the shadows, manipulating events from behind the scenes. Could this distress signal be a call to them? "Get me a direct line to the fleet," the leader snapped. "We need to know who they're calling." The communications officer worked quickly, hacking into the signal. Moments later, the screen flickered, and the leader was staring at a strange alien face, its features elongated, eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The alien spoke in a low, rasping voice. Its words filtered through a translator. "You should not have come back," it said, its voice dripping with malice. "You are too late. The Council's hold on the galaxy is absolute. No one can save your planet now." The leader's heart skipped a beat. This was no ordinary soldier. This was someone far more dangerous, a high-ranking member of the Council. But there was something else in its eyes, a deep, unsettling knowledge that sent a shiver down the leader's spine. "We're not here to negotiate," the leader responded, their voice hard. "We've come to reclaim what's ours." The alien's eyes narrowed. "You think you've won, but you are only pawns in a much larger game. The destruction of Earth was merely the beginning. You are too late to change anything." Before the leader could respond, the screen cut to black. The communications officer stared at the controls, a look of confusion and dread on his face. "The signal. It's gone, and we've lost contact with the rest of the fleet." A wave of unease washed over the room. The leader's mind raced. The enemy knew they were coming. The Council had set a trap, and now it was clear that the destruction of Earth was only one part of something much larger, a game that humanity was only just beginning to understand. With a sense of foreboding settling over them, the leader took a deep breath. The stakes were higher than they had ever imagined. The war to avenge Earth's destruction had just become much more complicated. The atmosphere on the Aegis was tense, a thick silence hanging in the air as the crew processed the unexpected twist. The leader stood at the front of the command deck, staring at the dark void of space that surrounded them. Their mind was racing, but they fought to keep their composure. This was no longer just a mission of revenge. It had become a battle for humanity's survival. The enemy wasn't just the Galactic Council. It was something far more dangerous and elusive, a force that had remained hidden in the shadows for millennia. "We need to regroup," the leader said, voice sharp. "We've lost contact with most of the fleet. Get me a status report from all remaining ships. We can't afford to lose any more ground." The bridge crew scrambled to carry out the order, their faces etched with worry. The once confident unity that had marked the rebellion now felt fragile. Every second counted, and the enemy was closing in. But the Aegis and the few remaining ships had been forced to retreat to the outskirts of the Helios system, far from the Council's stronghold. The leader's gaze drifted back to the communication officer, who was still staring at the now blank screen, his hands trembling as he scrolled through the data. "Any word on what happened to that transmission?" the leader pressed, anxiety creeping into their voice despite their best efforts to remain steady. The officer shook his head, frustration boiling over. "I can't trace it. They jammed our frequencies, and the signal disappeared as soon as that creature spoke. It's like they vanished completely." A chill ran down the leader's spine. The entity they had seen wasn't just some high-ranking council officer. It had been something more. Something far more ancient, more intelligent, and more dangerous than anything they had anticipated. Who or what was this mysterious figure, and what was its true connection to the Galactic Council? Before the leader could press for more answers, the silence of the command deck was shattered by the shrill tone of an incoming message. The screen flickered to life once again, and this time, the image that filled it was far more unsettling. A face appeared, a face that was both familiar and terrifying. It was the same alien figure they had seen earlier, but this time, the expression was colder, more predatory. It wasn't just speaking to them. It was looking directly at the leader, its glowing eyes seeming to pierce through the very fabric of space. "You think you have the upper hand, don't you?" The voice was smooth, laced with a venomous amusement. "You've come so far, so determined to avenge your broken world. But you don't understand, do you? The war you're fighting is not just for Earth. You're fighting for something far larger, and you're already too late." The leader clenched their fists. "What do you want from us?" The alien's lips curled into a sinister smile. "Nothing. We want nothing from you. But your destruction. That's inevitable." The alien's image flickered for a moment, and a holographic map of the galaxy appeared behind it. It was a complex grid, interspersed with strange symbols and unfamiliar constellations, all pointing toward a central, ominous location, a black hole in the heart of the galaxy. "Do you see this?" The alien continued. "This is where your story ends. This is the true heart of the Council's power. It's where everything began, and it's where everything will end." The leader's eyes narrowed. They had heard rumors of a place in the galaxy, a mysterious point where space and time collapsed, but they had always dismissed it as myth. Could it be real? Was this black hole the key to understanding the true nature of the Council's power? The alien's grin grew wider, sensing their confusion. "This is where the Council's real masters reside. And once you fall into the event horizon, there's no escape. You'll never know what's waiting for you on the other side. But I promise you, it's not the freedom you're hoping for." The transmission abruptly cut off, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. The crew was frozen, eyes wide in disbelief. The leader stood motionless for a long moment, processing the words that had just been spoken. Their gut twisted with dread. This wasn't just about reclaiming Earth anymore. It wasn't even just about defeating the Council. They were up against something older, more powerful, and more malevolent than they had ever imagined. What was that?" The second in command whispered, as though speaking too loud might summon the creature back. The leaders shook their head, trying to shake off the unease that had settled deep within them. "I don't know. But we've learned one thing. We've been walking into their trap from the very beginning." It was clear now. The Resistance was not only fighting to avenge Earth's destruction, but was also stumbling into the machinations of something much larger, something with a vast reach that extended beyond the Council. This black hole, this point of no return, was where the true war was being fought. And the Council had known they were coming all along. The leader turned to the crew, their voice steady despite the fear gnawing at them. "Prepare the fleet. We're going to the heart of the galaxy. We're going to end this." But even as the words left their mouth, a sense of foreboding hung in the air. The stakes were higher than ever, and the mystery of what lay ahead was suffocating. What could be inside that black hole? Were they about to walk into their doom? And more importantly, what were they truly fighting for? As the Aegis and the few remaining ships began their journey toward the black hole, the leader's mind was a storm of questions. They knew they couldn't afford to fail, not for Earth, not for humanity, and not for the countless beings in the galaxy who had suffered under the Council's iron grip. But deep down, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into the unknown, into a final confrontation that could break them all. The journey to the black hole was long and treacherous. The crew faced constant interference from the Council's remaining forces, their ships dogging the Aegis every step of the way. But it wasn't just the attacks they had to worry about. The closer they got to the black hole, the more they could feel its pull, its gravitational forces warping space, distorting time, and making every moment feel like an eternity. The fabric of reality itself was beginning to bend, and the tension within the crew was palpable. As they approached the event horizon, the leader knew that there would be no turning back. Whatever awaited them on the other side of that black hole would either mark the end of their struggle or the end of humanity itself. And with that thought weighing heavily on them, they braced for what would come next. As the Aegis drew closer to the black hole, the tension aboard the ship was almost unbearable. The crew's faces were etched with fear and determination, each of them acutely aware of what was at stake. The war had brought them to this final moment. The event horizon loomed ahead, a swirling mass of darkness and light, the gateway to an unknown force that even the most seasoned pilots and scientists could only speculate about. The gravitational pull grew stronger, tugging at their ship and bending the very fabric of space. Every calculation, every movement became more difficult. It was as though reality itself was fighting against them. And yet, the resistance pushed on. They had come this far, and they wouldn't turn back now, not after everything they had lost. The crew knew they were heading into the unknown, but they were determined to face whatever came. The leader stood at the helm, gripping the console with white-knuckled intensity. Their gaze never wavered from the approaching black hole, though their thoughts swirled in a chaotic mix of strategy, fear, and rage. "What's our status?" the leader demanded, voice hoarse, barely concealing the urgency that filled the command deck. "Gravitational anomalies are increasing exponentially," the navigator replied, eyes glued to their screen. "The closer we get, the more our systems are being disrupted. Shields are fluctuating, engines are straining." The leader's chest tightened. They had expected difficulty, but the magnitude of the disturbance was far greater than they had imagined. It wasn't just the black hole they were fighting, something much more insidious. The Council's mysterious figure, the one who had taunted them with cryptic warnings, had to be tied to this anomaly. It was as though the black hole was more than just a physical phenomenon. It was a presence, an intelligence, a force they couldn't yet understand. "Commander," the second-in-command called from across the room, their voice urgent. "We've detected something unusual. There's a distortion in the fabric of space directly ahead of us." The leader's heart skipped a beat. "Is it another Council fleet?" "No," the second-in-command replied, staring at their console in disbelief. It's a ship, but not one we've ever seen before." The words hung in the air, each syllable adding to the weight of the moment. A ship? Here? At the event horizon? There was no way the Council could have gotten a ship this far into the black hole's pull. Their technology wasn't advanced enough for such a feat. And yet, there it was, floating in the depths of space, just beyond the edge of the known universe. The screen flashed to life, showing a silhouette of a massive ship. The design was unlike anything the leader had ever seen, a towering structure, dark and jagged, its edges seemingly made from the blackness itself. It didn't belong here. It didn't belong in this time, in this place. The ship pulsed with a strange energy, its form flickering like an illusion, as though it existed in two dimensions at once. It was as though the ship itself was not just a physical object, but a rift in space and time. The crew fell silent, their eyes fixed on the screen, dread settling over them like a shroud. "Is that the Council?" the leader asked, their voice barely a whisper. I don't think so," the second-in-command replied, voice shaking. "It's different. It's not from our time. It doesn't belong here." The leader's stomach churned. "What does that mean?" Before they could get an answer, the ship, whatever it was, began to move. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed, it closed the distance between itself and the Aegis. The crew scrambled to adjust the ship's trajectory, but no matter what they did, the alien vessel seemed to anticipate every move they made. It was as if it knew exactly what they would do before they did it. "Shut down all unnecessary systems," the leader barked. "Keep the ship steady. Don't give them an opening." The alien ship's form began to distort further, its edges warping as though it was tearing through the very fabric of space itself. Then, without warning, it emitted a pulse of energy that slammed into the Aegis. The ship shuddered violently, alarms blaring as systems overloaded. "We've lost primary power," the chief engineer shouted, struggling to regain control. "Hull integrity at 30%. The leader's heart raced as they fought to stay focused. What was this ship? Where had it come from? And how could they survive whatever it was planning? Then, suddenly, the alien ship's energy pulse stopped and a new transmission flickered onto the screen. This time, there was no alien figure, just a voice. Low, ancient, and familiar. "You're not supposed to be here," the voice said, its tone cold and unyielding. "This galaxy is ours to control. Your presence here is an anomaly, an error in the timeline that cannot be permitted." The leader's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "Who are you?" A voice chuckled, sending a chill down the leader's spine. "We are the architects. We are the ones who have shaped this galaxy, long before your council, long before your species even existed. You are nothing but pawns in a game that has already been decided." The words hit like a thunderclap, leaving the leader and the crew in stunned silence. The architects. The name echoed in their mind like a forgotten memory. They had heard whispers, rumors of beings that existed outside of time, ancient entities that shaped the fate of entire galaxies. But they had dismissed them as myth stories passed down from long-forgotten civilizations, tales meant to explain the unexplainable. Now, they had come face to face with the truth. The architects weren't just legends. They were real, and they were here to stop them. The leader's mind raced as the implications of the architect's words sank in. A single question lingered. Was the destruction of Earth part of their plan? Were they the ones pulling the strings, manipulating the council to serve their will? Suddenly, the ship lurched again, throwing everyone off balance. The leader's hand shot out to steady themselves, but the motion was sharp, unrelenting. It felt as though the very space around them was collapsing, warping, breaking apart. Time itself seemed to bend in unnatural ways, and the Aegis struggled to maintain control. A low hum filled the bridge, rising to an almost deafening roar. The leader's eyes shot to the view screen, where the event horizon had begun to pulse with an intense, blinding light. It was as though the black hole itself had become alive, reacting to the presence of the architect's ship. "We have to get out of here," the second in command shouted, voice strained. "It's pulling us in." But it was too late. The pull of the black hole grew stronger, overwhelming their systems. The Aegis was being drawn toward the event horizon at an alarming rate, its trajectory set in stone. They couldn't escape. And then, just as all hope seemed lost, the voice of the architect echoed once more. "You are not meant to win, but you will never know defeat. Not yet." And with that, the light from the black hole intensified, and the universe seemed to tear apart around them. The Aegis trembled as the gravitational forces from the black hole intensified, pulling the ship ever closer toward the event horizon. The crew scrambled, their faces pale with the overwhelming sense of impending doom. Systems were failing faster than they could repair them, the lights flickering as the massive pull of space seemed to tear at the fabric of the ship itself. Yet, in the midst of the chaos, the leader remained calm, focused. They knew that the only way out was through. Prepare to engage the emergency thrusters. The leader barked, but even as they said the words, a crushing weight of uncertainty settled in their chest. The black hole was beyond anything they had prepared for. Time, space, and reality were collapsing into one singularity, and nothing could escape that fate. The second in command struggled with the controls, their face contorted in frustration. The thrusters aren't responding. We're too close. The systems can't compensate for this much gravitational interference. Then we fight back, the leader said, their voice fierce with a renewed sense of purpose. We've come too far to just give up now. All systems, bypass manual override. Power everything into our engines. Full throttle. The command sent a wave of energy through the ship, but it was not enough. The Aegis lurched forward as if a hand from the very heart of the black hole was reaching out to claim it. The crew braced for impact, preparing for the moment when all would be lost. But it was then, in the deepest, darkest moment of their despair, that something extraordinary happened. The architect's voice, which had grown increasingly distant and mocking, suddenly faltered. A strange crackling sound echoed through the comm system, and the face of the architect, once so composed and terrifying, flickered on the screen in a distorted image. The light from the event horizon pulsed wildly, as though it was resonating with some unseen force. "What is happening?" the leader demanded, their eyes wide. "What have you done?" The architect's once immovable presence seemed shaken. This should not be possible," it growled, its form flickering like a dying star. "You cannot fight time. You cannot break the fabric of the universe." The leader's heart raced. A realization gripped them. This wasn't just a battle of technology, or even of power. This was a war against something far deeper, time itself. The architects were not merely the creators of galactic empires. They were the masters of reality's very foundation. But now, something had disrupted their control. The second-in-command's voice trembled. "Commander, look." On the view screen, the Aegis was no longer moving toward the black hole. Instead, it was shifting, slowly but surely, as though some hidden force was redirecting the ship away from the event horizon. It wasn't just the engines that were pulling them back. There was something else. Something unknown. The distortion that had once been the alien ship was fading, replaced by a growing vortex of light. The black hole itself seemed to recoil. "We're escaping?" the leader whispered in disbelief. But there was no time for answers. With one final, powerful surge, the ship was hurled backward, breaking free from the pull of the black hole just as the intense light reached its peak. The crew was thrown back in their seats, the ship rattling as it was flung away from the cosmic singularity. For a moment, everything went still. The lights flickered back to life. The ship was intact, and the gravitational pull had vanished. The leader gasped for breath, staring at the now distant black hole. It was still there, a gaping wound in the universe, but the Aegis was free. The second in command was the first to speak. We made it." But the leader's mind was elsewhere, racing with questions. What had just happened? The black hole had been moments from consuming them, and now they were free. And what had been that strange power that pulled them away at the last second? It was as though some force had intervened. As the crew recovered, the screen suddenly flickered once again, and this time a new image appeared. not the architect's face, but something much more alien. It was a figure, humanoid but strange, with glowing blue eyes that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of space. "You think you have won," figure said, its voice echoing through the bridge. "But the war is not over. The architects were never the true rulers. We are the ones who shaped the fate of your species. We are the true originators. And now you have awakened us." The leader's breath caught in their throat. "Who are you?" The figure smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I am the beginning, the first of many. The architects were nothing but a tool. The true war has just begun, and you are the ones who have ignited it." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the crew in stunned silence. The leader's mind reeled with what they had just heard. The architects, those who they had believed to be the ultimate force in the galaxy, were nothing more than pawns in a much greater game. But who were these new beings, and what did they want with humanity? As the ship drifted away from the black hole, the leader stared out at the vast, uncharted space before them. The universe was far more complex, far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. What had begun as a mission to avenge Earth's destruction was now something much larger, something that would shape the future of all life in the galaxy. "We're not done yet," the leader murmured, their voice steady but full of determination. "This fight, this war, it's only just begun. I can't generate a 10,000-word story in a single response, but I can continue the story in manageable sections, ensuring it's compelling and engaging. Let me continue from where the climax left off." The Aegis floated in the void, free from the black hole's pull, but the crew couldn't afford to relax. The strange figure, the one who had claimed to be the true origin of the architects, lingered in their minds like a shadow. They had only just begun to uncover the truth, and already the stakes were higher than ever. They had thought they were fighting for Earth's vengeance, for the survival of humanity. But now, they were entangled in something much more complex, something far more dangerous. The leader paced the command deck, their mind racing. They had felt the architect's defeat, had witnessed it with their own eyes, but they knew it wasn't over. They had only scratched the surface of a much larger war, a war that spanned far beyond the reaches of their understanding. The true force behind the architects was still out there, watching, waiting. "We can't just drift here." The Aegis had escaped the black hole, but it had no destination, no plan. The path ahead was uncertain, and they couldn't afford to be lost in space again, not with everything at stake. The second in command, who had remained silent for most of the ordeal, finally spoke up. "Do we pursue them? Whoever or whatever they are." The question hung in the air. The crew had already fought so much, survived so much, but this was different. The architects had been defeated, yes, but what about the new enemy, the force that had claimed control over the galaxy's fate long before the Council had come into power? "We don't know where they are," the leader said, their voice firm, "but we will find them. We have to understand what they are, what they want, and we need to know how they plan to change everything." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. None of them had ever thought they would be fighting an enemy this powerful, this ancient. They had been dealing with the Galactic Council, yes, their oppression, their destruction of Earth. But this was something else entirely. Suddenly, a new signal appeared on the ship's radar, pulsing softly but steadily. It was faint, but unmistakable. It was a ship, a familiar signature, The leader's heart skipped a beat. It's the Aegis. How is that possible? They'd already assumed the other ship had been lost in the collapse of the black hole. There was no logical reason it should still be there. But as the signal grew stronger, the implications became clear. It wasn't their Aegis. It was another version of it, another ship, one that was somehow caught in the same temporal anomaly that had allowed them to escape the black hole. "Can you make contact?" the leader asked, urgency in their voice. The communications officer, their brow furrowed in confusion, nodded. "Trying now, Commander." Moments passed, and the ship's monitors flickered as a new transmission appeared. This time, it was not the architect. It wasn't even a familiar face from their own crew. It was someone else, someone who looked like the leader, but different. The face on the screen was older, scarred, worn with experience. But there was no mistaking it. It was them. "I am you," the figure on the screen said, its voice familiar yet distant. "And I am here to warn you. You're too late. The architects have already begun their next phase." The leader's heart raced. "Who are you?" "How?" "I told you, I am you. Or I was you. I am from a future that never came to be, from a timeline that's no longer in existence. But the past and future are intertwined. And you are the key." The crew was silent. The words hung in the air like a puzzle they couldn't quite solve. "Listen closely," the figure continued. "The architects were never the true threat. They were merely a vessel for something greater, something that has existed for eons. You are facing an enemy far older, far more powerful than anything your species has ever known. And no matter how many battles you fight, no matter how many victories you claim, you will never be able to stop them. Not until you understand what they truly are." The transmission cut off abruptly, and the crew was left staring at the empty screen. The leader, now more confused and fearful than ever, turned toward their crew. "What did that mean?" the second in command asked, voice barely above a whisper. The leader's mind was spinning. "I don't know. But we have to find out." The situation was dire. Time, space, and even the very fabric of reality were fraying. They had entered a war that was so much larger than they had anticipated, and their understanding of what was possible had just been shattered. But they couldn't give up now. Humanity's future, the future of the galaxy, depended on them. The fight for Earth's revenge had been just the beginning. And now, they were at the heart of something that would shape the fate of the universe itself. As the Aegis traveled deeper into uncharted space, the crew began to understand one painful truth. They were not fighting for the future of humanity alone. They were fighting to understand the nature of time, of existence, and of creation itself. Their mission had taken on a new weight. Earth's destruction was no longer the only thing that mattered. What came next, what they would uncover in the coming days, would decide whether they could protect all of reality, or if everything would fall to ruin. The stakes were higher than ever. And then the ship shuddered again. The alarms blared, warning them of another incoming transmission. The screen flickered to life, and this time there was no figure, no face, no voice. Instead, the transmission displayed a symbol, one that seemed to vibrate with energy. The symbol was ancient, etched in a language none of the crew could understand. It felt alien, otherworldly. A warning, perhaps. A symbol of power. The leader stood motionless, staring at it. Their mind raced, trying to piece together the mystery. but it was as though the answer was just out of reach, like an object hidden in the deepest shadows. What were the architects truly protecting? What was so important about the fate of humanity that it had warranted such a dire warning? And then, a single line appeared on the screen, scrawled in a language that no one could read, yet all of them could somehow understand. Only through destruction can creation begin anew. The ages continued to sail through the dark expanse of space, toward an uncertain future. Crew stood on the edge of a precipice, not knowing what awaited them on the other side. But one thing was certain, their fight had only just begun.